about, but we have to get right into our special guest who's already here. We don't even have to introduce him because he's already showing his face because producer Sean just does it like that, slow sipper. Anyway, we are bringing on the one and only executive director of the National Collegiate Players Association, Ramogi Huma. Joins us from UCLA, sunny California, where the land is beautiful and it can be dangerous sometimes, but hey, you can't ever knock the hustle of a UCLA Bruin. Played in our era, right, Ramogi?
Yep, that's right. 95 to 99.
95 to 99 in the Rose Bowl. Look at that. All right, man, we got some good pictures of you.
All right.
Play a little linebacker.
Okay, Rum, you look like you were hit something back then.
Hey, back then, a few more pounds heavier than I am now.
Yeah, man. Hey, so, we're going to get into what you're doing now. Let's talk a little bit about your background and how you got to UCLA playing linebacker the way that you did to get to that level.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun, man. I was blessed to be in a high school where we had a lot of talent. My last year, we essentially lost the national championship. We were one in the nation the whole year. Lost the last game, unfortunately. It hurt, but got some offers. And when I went to visit UCLA, it was just a great match. So that's why I got there. And actually, I was an undersized linebacker, which is part of this story. But it was a lot of fun. We had some good years throughout my time.
Undersized. What was undersized back in the late 90s?
I think I came in dripping wet. I was 210. Dripping wet, I was 210. Yeah. So the coaches were like, "Oh, we'll put weight on you," And so for me, they didn't know I was already putting on weight. I was eating 5-6 times a day. So I'm like, I'm not sure how much weight I'll be able to get on, but we had a good strength and conditioning program. But actually, I'll get into it. I mean, really, that kind of connects because that same year, back then, if you remember, if you're on campus, you just have meal cards, right? So I went from eating 5-6 meals a day to 3 times and burning all those calories. I mean, I lost a bunch of weight, and in the middle of the season, one of my teammates, he was an All-American linebacker, he was on a radio show kind of talking about these issues, saying, "Hey, look, I don't even have food in my refrigerator. I'm broke, and coach is driving a big car from sponsorship. Something's up." And groceries were left on his doorstep. The NCAA found out, suspended him, and basically, they said you should not have received those groceries because you benefited from your athletic reputation or your NIL, essentially. So he got suspended, and we found that out. It was crazy because I remember walking into the meeting room when I found that out. Right before that, I had passed a student store. They're selling his jersey, fully capitalizing off his NIL, right? They're selling his jersey. Walk in, and because food was left at his doorstep, he didn't even know, by the way. His roommate found out. His roommate took him in. He found out later, but the NCAA suspended him. And I felt at that point players needed a voice. This wasn't right. And it was just an injustice. And some of that stuff we're trying to get over the hump on still.
Yeah, you're not joking with a hump on this. I mean, there's a lot going on in regards to name, image, likeness. We talk about it often on this show here. And it's always a pleasure to talk to somebody who sees it from a global scale, the entire nation. Obviously you started playing your ball in the Pac-12 at UCLA, and you had a teammate that was directly affected by this, and that caused you to create this new association. But, when you're looking at what's going on right now around the country, you see states trying to change laws, and you're seeing this major fight from the administration, the NCAA. What does this mean to you? Like, can you just give people a little quick summary of what's going on right now between the NCAA and the athletes?
Yeah, so actually our organization, the NCPA, we sponsored the very first NIL law here in California and helped to get passed in states across the nation, including Michigan. A lot of great states, lawmakers standing up saying, look, this is wrong. An athlete should have the right to their own name and they should not be restricted. So we've been winning on that. And unfortunately, there was a lawsuit settlement recently that kind of really started to try to reel it in. With the NIL freedoms came in more recent years, this last year and a half, states have said, guess what? Not only can third parties pay NIL, our schools can pay too. So we're winning on those state laws as well. But the settlement, this was basically the conferences, the Power Five, they were getting sued along with the NCAA for trying to prohibit athlete pay from their schools. So they get sued and they enter a settlement. With a settlement, instead of allowing states, by state law, the schools to pay whatever they want to the players and third parties, even the NIL collectives, they're capping it, right? The settlement says, well, only up to 22% of what the school makes. And collectives, we don't like you. We actually like your money, but we don't like you giving it to players. So we're going to shut that down and let the boosters start paying us again. And that's kind of this scheme that was put together in the settlement. So the pendulum's starting to swing back. And in the background, you got Congress. So Congress just introduced a SCORE Act. It was about a week and a half ago, which is trying to enshrine the unjust rules of the settlement into federal law and wipe out all state laws. So, this podcast right now, what we're talking about right now, there's about 4 or 5 different things that are all major. We're in major fights right now.
Wow. The SCORE Act. So you said the Congress is fighting. The NCAA is trying to come at the players and trying to put a cap on them. And then we just saw over the weekend, there's a lot of talk about President Trump potentially signing an executive order to limit the amount of money for athletes. Can you give us some insight on that?
Yeah, so I'm not sure if the draft is out there. I saw a draft of it. It's actually, fortunately, pretty mild. I think he has his leanings similar to the SCORE Act. The NCAA and the coaches and the conferences been in everyone's ear up there. They have armies of lobbyists, and so they're up in the White House too. But so far as executive order hasn't done anything drastic, the draft that I've seen, but essentially it kind of directs the administration to try to lean towards policies. The DOJ, the National Labor Relations Board, lean towards policies that will what they categorize as help to preserve sports and some of those things, stabilize college sports. But unfortunately, some of those same talking points that the NCAA uses is not about just stabilizing. It's about really stripping players of the rights that we've spent decades fighting for, and billions of dollars. When we're talking about the collectives and boosters, look, the boosters are going to boost no matter what. When we were playing before we had NIL, who were the boosters paying? They were paying the universities, the coaches, coach buyouts, everything else, right? They just want their money back. They don't care that boosters are out there giving them an advantage. They just don't want the boosters to have the choice to include the players. So this excuse of the Wild Wild West, look, the boosters are going to boost no matter what. The transfer portal, that's a different beast, and we like transfer freedoms, but hey, we're for reasonable transfer restrictions. And that's really kind of what's festering a bit, from all sides. So, I think Congress rightfully could be focusing on the transfer issue, but they really need to be focused on the things that matter. Safety standards. How many players have died since we played? Unnecessarily. Preventable deaths. If you look at the NFL, look, Corey Stringer back in 2001, he died.
Yeah, that's right.
In the union, they had a union. They helped put pressure and they got standards, right? Since then, no one's died. In college, people die every year from preventable deaths. There's sexual assaults. There's concussions, traumatic brain injury. Those are the things that we need Congress for, not robbing players of billions of dollars.
Yeah.
Damn right. I agree with that one.
We got work cut out for us, though. I think in the House, it's kind of a freight train in the House. It's become pretty, the states, what was cool about the states is, look, let's not pretend this country's been very divided for a number of years here politically, but working with state lawmakers didn't matter. Blue, red, purple, everybody wanted to make sure their athletes got as much as they could get. These laws were passing through, sailing through, but in Congress, it's not like that. So really, I think it looks like the House is more kind of on the NCAA side. They just want to give the NCAA a gift, make sure no one can sue them, let them take all the money that they want to take from the players. In the Senate, there's similar leanings, but there's also the filibuster. So, Cory Booker, Richard Blumenthal, Maria Cantwell, they've been holding it down. They've been preventing that for a long time, kind of a theft from the players. So we're hoping that, the freight train can stop at that chamber and we can hold out for something that's good, that really would be meaningful for college athletes.
So, Ramogi, when you look at where things are with the players, I've heard you brought this up a little bit. You said that when it looks at you look at the transfer portal, it's something that you would you're for maybe a more restrictive transfer portal. When you talk to people just passing by, they tend to say, "I don't like this NIL; it's bad for the game." But then you press a little more, and you ask people, would you want to work for free? Would you want to have a cap on your own income, and I don't care what you do for a living. And then they reverse field and they say, I just don't like them moving around so freely. So in the public sentiment, I think if they can understand this, it seems that it's complicated because they make it sound more complicated than it really is when you're talking about a classic labor versus management, issue here. What, in your opinion, is going on, like the billions of dollars that you were talking about? Like I think I've heard you before talking about there's a number of the amount of money that's being transferred right now between the athletes and the administration.
So Open Doors is the biggest NIL platform out there, and they've done annual studies. So this upcoming year, they found that over 80% of all third-party NIL is projected to come from collectives, NIL collectives. That's the boosters that pull their money together and they want to make deals for players at a particular school. Well, 80% of that would be about $2 billion this year, just in 1 year. So 2025, 26, that's $2 billion that would be flowing to players of money that's already flowing. Now, what the settlement seeks to do is extinguish almost every dime of that and say, no, that's wrong. That's quote unquote pay for play. Funny thing is they're in the settlement, they get to pay the players for playing. I mean, it's not pay for play. They usually some it's crazy. I remember seeing in the hearing in last fall, the judge said the same thing. Well, isn't that paying for? You're proposing paying the players directly from the schools? Isn't that pay for play? They said no, that's not pay for play. But if collectives pay the players, that's pay for play. It's nonsensical. And they got big megaphones. They got their networks spewing the stuff out, partnerships, so they can drumbeat stuff like nobody else's business. But in reality, they just want their money back. They want to shut down $2 billion, so the collectives have no choice but to pay the schools to try to win and be better. In the meantime, that cap, 22% that a school may or may not pay the players of revenue. If all the power schools paid that cap, was about $20 million. You're talking about maybe 1.4 billion, a little over 1.4 billion. So you're talking about shutting down, remonopolizing $2 billion, taking away from players and only giving them maybe 1.4 billion. That alone is a problem. And like you said, what average person would want to take that kind of pay cut? Especially when it's illegal in many of these states. This is not something that's legal in many states, including Michigan.
Yeah, that's a great point. You talk about the competitive advantages of some states. As we're seeing even today, there was a ruling. I think the NCAA was again sued or brought to court. From the lawyers representing the House settlement regarding collectives being able to pay because they don't. You just mentioned it. You said collectives are pay for play, but the schools are allowed to pay the athletes for play. So I think a judge just ruled within the hour here, maybe a little over an hour ago, that now collectives are allowed to pay the athletes.
So the way they have this in the settlement, yes, the NCAA conferences, they overreach. They try to just ban all collective pay. And what we're saying is, well, it's not going to necessarily ban all collective pay because they couldn't do that pursuant to the settlement. And that's why the plaintiff's lawyers won on that case. But what they're going to do is they're going to set an artificial cap. So let's just say you are a recruit and you're a great offensive lineman. And normally without any of the caps, you would have got $700,000. Okay. What they're going to do is say, well, you're not worth $700,000, even though the market just paid $700,000. Obviously the player's worth $700,000. They're seeking to artificially cap it and say, well, how many social media people do you have? Well, I only got 1,000 followers. Well, then your post isn't worth an accumulation of 700,000. Maybe $70. That's how they're going to try to extinguish that money. And that's not a real case, but that paints the picture of what they're going to say. They're just going to arbitrarily pretend that there's some fair market value, which is everybody that knows about markets is the market dictates the market. And we know what the market was prior to these illegal caps. The market was, if you're a top O lineman, you might get $700,000 or more coming out of high school. Or if you're a starting left tackle at Michigan State, maybe you get a lot more than you're going to get now from collectives because you can't. They're going to say you can't justify that. So that's the language they use to shut down virtually all the collective money to try to allow the schools to remonopolize all the players' NIL value.
Hey, so what happened to the schools that take away the collective groups that kick the collective groups out of the school?
Yeah, I mean, you got some collectives that just shut down. So obviously that goes to zero. If you don't have a collective at all, that definitely it just goes to zero. And there are a number of schools that have done that. So that's a good point. They were trying to say, well, collectives can still do their thing. No, they can't still do their thing if they abide by the settlement. Now, it's important. It's also important to know that these collectives don't have to abide by the settlement. They're not party to the lawsuit. Okay, so boosters can still, if they want to, they can offer and those kinds of things. But they try to hammer the players. But in Michigan, for instance, we have a great law that says the NCAA, the conferences, and the schools cannot interfere with the athletes' NIL opportunities, NIL deals. Can't keep them out of games and everything else. But they're doing it anyway. So we're wrapping our heads around that, and we're exploring these other issues. Look, this is not legal. This is not legal in over a dozen states, including Michigan, California, and many others. So, as I mentioned, I think we're kind of off camera earlier. This settlement, I don't expect it to last. I think they got duct tape, bubble gum, and a lot of prayers, and it's going to fall apart sooner or later.
Yeah, duct tape, bubble gum, a lot of prayers, and you're seeing right now, a huge shift. I mean, it seems like every time someone brings the NCAA into court, the NCAA loses, and they lose really badly. Because it's just there's no other place in our society where these kinds of things are allowed. Cedric talks a lot about you mentioned what the rates, the going rates are. The market. That's the dollar more concept, right?
Yeah, right.
Talk about your dollar more concept, Sid. And how that you can't have that go away, especially with.
No. I'm matter of fact. I just put in the application to join the NCPA.
All right. Welcome, brother.
Right. They need someone like me because all I'm asking for is $1 more. Just give me $1 more, and then we all yours. You know what I'm saying? So, look for my application, brother. I'm on my way.
All right. Nah, looking forward to seeing that.
So seriously, so are you looking to maybe get a consortium of athletes that are able to unionize and be able to maybe collectively bargain at some point?
So I was actually part of a different separate organization called CAPA, College Athletes Players Association, back in 2014. And we led the effort to unionize Northwestern football players because their quarterback at the time, Kane Coulter, came to me and said, hey, this is, we should have a union just like the NFL athletes have a union. And I think every athlete should make that determination. Look, we should have equal rights under labor law for every athlete, for every American, right? And for college athletes, any college athlete that wants to try to affirm their employee status and fight that way, they should have the opportunity. Now, the SCORE Act would strip them of that right. They would literally create a second-class citizenship and say, look, you cannot exercise your rights under labor law. You are non-employee. We're saying that from Congress, right? We're putting that in federal law. Same with antitrust laws, meaning price fixing and all that. You can't sue any longer. They're trying to exclude athletes from equal rights under the law. Now, our organization, we advocate for athletes, being able to go that route. We are not organizing college athletes. We're a 501c3. One reason why I did it from another organization is because, it's not a C5. A C5 is a union. So, but I think too, at this point, I think college athletes, they are getting some better benefits, obviously, than when we played. They're not getting full benefits, and it's not anywhere close to fair. They need comprehensive reform. But we're also advocating for athletes of all sports. The reality is that you can be a golfer on campus, but you don't have the leverage of a big-time football player on campus or basketball player. So you can have a union, but if you don't have leverage, where's that leave you? But that golfer still needs protections. That gymnast still needs protections. We need Congress because you got about 600,000 athletes without any protections, and only some of them, even if they had a union, would have the leverage to actually make a difference on their campus, health and safety wise, money wise, making sure they can graduate, they don't lose their scholarships because of frivolous reasons. So our organization, we fight for players of all sports, and definitely fight for the athletes' rights to exercise every single right under the law.
Wow. I mean, this is a good thing. But the biggest step in order to be able to collectively bargain, right, is that ability to be labeled as employees. That's one thing that you kind of touched on. You talking about the antitrust exemptions and things like that. I know here in the state of Michigan, there's a couple of new laws that were introduced recently. One was for, there not to be a cap, or no athlete could be penalized by the NCAA or any other organization for NIL related things. And then the other one was to allow for athletes to become employees, because that's that step to being able to be considered, a union, to unionize and then be able to collectively bargain. One thing that I never could understand, I've heard a lot of coaches, I've heard a lot of athletic directors, and going over the years here in the last couple of decades, especially in my time as a broadcaster at Michigan State, you hear them say that you guys don't want to be employees now. Can you shed some light as to why being an employee is so much worse than where things are right now?
It's not. So with the typical line, the NCAA talking point goes is you don't want to be employees because you could get fired, right? Players have been getting fired since we were there. It's called getting run off, right? When your coach doesn't want you, hey, they get run off. And by the way, all those players in the transfer portal did not go there voluntarily. Many of the athletes right now in the transfer portal, they're all taking the blame as greedy athletes disappearing and people wagging their fingers, at them. They don't realize how many of these athletes were run off. Players get fired all the time. Okay. Our point for a long, long time was athletes get paid. Athletes have rights. Athletes have protections. Athletes, if they want to get together and try to bargain for something different, under labor law, they'd have the option, the opportunity to do that. But what's interesting is the Michigan law. So I mentioned our effort to Northwestern to organize Northwestern football players. That was 2014, and we actually won the original ruling at the region. They said, yeah, these players are employees. And so some of the states, Michigan was one of the states that by the end of the year had banned employee status for athletes and banned players unionizing rights under state law. So state law governs public schools. So that means Michigan State, Michigan, in 2014, they lost that, even the attempt to try to go and affirm their rights under the law. The state legislature shut it down. So the bill you're talking about now is to remedy what happened based on the effort we had at Northwestern and the reaction. Ohio's another one of them. So Ohio and Michigan, they shut it down. Private schools are governed not by the states. They're governed by the federal government under the National Labor Relations Act. So it's a little different. And, it's not a silver bullet. Unionization is not a silver bullet for two reasons. One is because you have this mismatch of state law, federal law. People say, what if college athletes got into one big union? How? Because public school athletes are governed by state law. It'd be public employee. It's just different, right? And the other is, and this is transparency, every athlete should know that's considering joining a union at any point, is that you need to be strong if you join a union, because guess what? If you're not, and you're not willing to strike, then you can get smashed in a collective bargaining agreement. They could smash you back into the Stone Age, and your generations well beyond. So, you don't want to toy around with it. If people are serious and they're ready to go at it and pursue, that's one thing. But just checking the box, you better know what you're doing, and the people who are leading or organizing, they better be able to articulate that, because otherwise you may be making a bad decision for you and your team, but could be a great decision. Athletes have a lot of leverage on their particular campus. It could change a lot. So there's a lot to it.
Ram, I know you got to get out of here, but before you do, what about the kids that's in high school? Like, you get some of these high school kids that are already getting paid from university because they gave a verbal commit. And then also, like, for a dad, that's going through the situation, what kind of changes, or what can we tell the dads that's out there?
I think you got to look at state law. If I was going through this process and my son was going through something like this, I would look at state law to make sure my son was in a state that had good laws. Number one, and number two, I'd be talking to lawyers and agents. We fought. The other part of the NIL is we fought to make sure every single bill, we said they need agents, they need representation. Now, not all the agents are perfect, and we need to get there. But players couldn't even have representation before that when we played. Could you imagine that? Murderers get rights to a lawyer, but athletes didn't coming out of high school because they didn't want you to be empowered, right? So talk to lawyers, agents, stay informed. And I think don't accept it. Don't accept your son getting half the money they're worth and no protections. And it's a fight, and it's going to be a fight. And join our group, ncpanow.org.
Oh, I'm already on that, brother. and I'm bringing my slogan.
All right.
$1 more, baby. We're going to do this, baby. Let's do it.
All right.
This is great. It's an enlightening ideas that you have here. You look at, the interesting point you just brought up, was that, if you go and you collect a bargain without the proper leadership, you can get, killed. Go back to the Stone Ages, as we put, because the athletes need to know their power. And one of the biggest things in any union is the ability to strike. And I know that's something that that has a lot of administrative types clutching their pearls, so to speak, because God forbid the athletes stand up and say, enough is enough if they keep trying to do this kind of thing and not play on any given Saturday. Can you imagine what would happen if something like that occurred?
Yeah, it's a lot of leverage, a lot of power. I mean, we saw that Grambling State did it, and they had some leverage. Missouri, they did it a while back for different reasons, right? But there's a lot of contracts, millions of dollars at stake, and really quickly the school realizes what those players are worth when they're threatening that business model.
That's right, man. Hey, we really appreciate you. I know you had to get out of here. Appreciate you spending some time with us and kind of educating our fan base and people who follow us on what's going on out there in beyond the Big Ten. But hey, now you are in the Big Ten, though.
Yeah,
so,
that's different. Yeah.
Isn't it different? Yeah, conference expansion and everything else. But man, we really appreciate the time today. Ramogi Huma, Executive Director, and man, freedom fighter for all $1 Mo athletes that are out there. We appreciate you, brother.
All right, I appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Appreciate you, dog.
All right.